Hello, everyone. Welcome to Leadership Live by Sounding Board. I'm Christine Tao. I'm the co-founder and CEO at Sounding Board. We are a dynamic leader development platform that helps companies create impactful leaders. And today I have Christina Pinckney with me. She is the Leader Experience Program Manager at Workday, a company you've probably heard of. But there's a lot more to her than just that, and which you'll hear about today. And so welcome and thanks so much for coming on today, Christina.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Well, the thing that we always do here at Leadership Live is actually first start by learning a little bit more about you and your origin story. And so I'd love for you to share that with the audience and tell us a little bit about yourself and maybe how that led you into the career that you're in now.
Sure. So I actually was mulling over this question as I was preparing for this event. And I think when I think about the person that I am today, there are two key concepts that have really shaped who I am. The first one is stewardship, and the other is intercultural experiences. So first on stewardship, something you should know about me is I come from a family of public servants. So in my immediate family, we have a teacher, we have a nurse, a police officer. One of my brothers also worked on homelessness initiatives in San Francisco. And beyond that, we also have many extended family members who served in other ways, like in the military, or my grandmother was a lunch lady. And also, just the home that I grew up in was a foster home. So we fostered many different children as I was growing up. So growing up in that environment, I think it really showed me the importance of helping others and uplifting others, and just kind of this passion for service. But it also really showed me how sometimes there are circumstances beyond our control that can affect, how our future goes. So that's one part of kind of who I am. On the other side, I was born and raised in the Bay Area, where I was surrounded by such diverse cultures and people and lifestyles. So if you could imagine, we had a lot of different kinds of family friends. So maybe one day we're celebrating Chinese New Year with Chinese family friends, and another day we're at a Nigerian wedding. And so growing up like that was super, super cool, but also really made me curious about different cultures and lifestyles. And that's just kind of come with me throughout my life. And I think that really informed what I decided to study in college. I studied international relations and business, and I also studied language. So I studied Spanish and self-studied Chinese, continue to study Chinese even today. And at the same time, I still had a bit of that service component. I was an advisor for international graduate students who were teaching classes at the university. So another cool way to learn about different languages and cultures, but also understand the challenges of international students in the American education system, which would be really key because I decided for grad school, I was going to go abroad. So I studied international relations in England and China. Really great experience, definitely had its challenges. And I looked back to kind of seeing it from the other side as an advisor to those graduate students. And that really kind of helped me pull through. And sometimes after that, I went to work in international education in China. I was an internship and college advisor, but was also really lucky to be able to work on some local community education programs and initiatives around issues like disability rights, the LGBTQ plus community, migrant labor, left behind children. So that was also a really amazing experience. From that, I returned to the US in 2018, where I did a brief stint in consulting and decided it was not for me at that time. But so then I went back to international education and I did worked on programs for international visiting students and shifted more towards working on entrepreneurship, innovation, and leadership development programs for partnered MBA programs abroad or also international organizations. And that's kind of where I started to foray into the kind of leadership development and learning and development programs that you might see at large organizations or like at Workday. At the same time, again, another cool opportunity came to me. I'm part of a team that started a nonprofit leadership development and sponsorship program. It's called African American China Leadership Fellows, and it is for African Americans who work in international affairs in general, but more specifically in US-China relations. So that's also been an amazing experience. And that's kind of been the things I've been doing for this past couple of years.
Well, you've certainly been busy, Christina.
Yeah, very busy.
I love that you've pulled that thread from, all the way through your work, from, your life into your work, and especially even taking your time, having worked abroad or studied abroad, and even continue to maintain that even as you are doing a full-time job at Workday.
Yeah.
And the thing I think that really struck me when we spoke was actually your first defining characteristic, or this idea of stewardship and service. And we talked about how that related to a lot of the programs that you ended up creating, really ingraining that into like the fabric of those programs, and mentorship really, and sponsorship. Those two ideas came up a lot in our conversation. And so one of the things I think you had a very strong opinion about was that those are different, both
Yes.
equally and very critical to a leader's development, but that those were different things. And could we talk a little bit more about that? Because we've seen actually now, in the space that we're in, for a lot of the people in the workforce, organizations are really going deeper into mentorship and sponsorship programs. And so I think they just benefit from some of your knowledge there.
Okay, sure. So yeah, I've been thinking about this, and also, yeah, talking about this a lot with my colleagues recently. I would say we need both mentorship and sponsorship, as you mentioned, but
Yeah.
just to give a very light overview of like what are some differences. So I'd say mentors are someone who is also very experienced, who can offer guidance and coaching, but they could honestly be from any industry. They don't really have to be specifically in your organization. They don't have to be in your industry. They could just be another professional who has insights that they could offer.
Yeah.
When you think about a sponsor, you really want someone who is tied into a network that you want to expand your influence in, or that you want entry into. So
Yeah.
for me, I think that a sponsor should be someone in your industry if you plan to, become a leader or have a larger role in your industry. And sometimes maybe even in your own organization, if it's your goal to grow in your organization or
Yeah.
catalyze your career advancement. So a sponsor is someone who maybe, they don't have to be in your exact management line if it's in your org, but they could be someone who's a more senior leader, or someone who is in another function, but still in your industry or in your org. And they can be really instrumental in introducing you to the right people, but also more importantly, opening doors that normally wouldn't open for you. And that's really critical for people who come from, groups that are underrepresented, or who may have different barriers that they cannot overcome on their own. A sponsor is someone who can help kind of pull you across that barrier, whether it's telling you about, unique opportunities that only they know about, or again, it's introducing you to someone you may never meet otherwise, or bringing you to an event that is like, for a professional association they're a part of. These are all sponsorship actions that I
Yeah.
don't think mentors can do these things, but I don't think they're realizing that it should be intentional that you do these things. So I
Yeah.
think that's one key difference between a mentor and a sponsor.
Yeah. And what I loved also was that, this is not a real word, I don't think, you programatized it, right? And when you
Yeah.
shared with me some of the programs that you had run, whether it was at Workday or within the American Mandarin Society, you had very explicitly outlined the expectations, the responsibility, and then what the behaviors would be for folks that were filling these roles. And to me, that was very powerful, because oftentimes we hear the words mentorship, sponsorship, but people may not know actually what does that mean, and what am I committing to when I
Yes.
take on these types of roles.
Absolutely, totally agree. And if I could expand on that,
Yeah.
it is so important both for mentorship programs and sponsorship programs, like you said, to set out the expected outcomes. And when you do that, you'll see the difference. So, for example, for a mentor, again, the expected outcome might be, hey, you just offer advice and this person feels more confident and more prepared in their current role, or just confident in their professional career. But for a sponsor, it might be, actually, we need you to advocate for this person. We need you to raise their name when you're talking about talent. We need you to invite them to events or connect them to people that you think are, really key in your network. These are sponsorship expectations. And there's a little bit of like reputational, I don't want to say reputational risk, but there is definitely reputational investment for a sponsor, because in a way, they're putting their own reputation on the line when they're raising someone else's name or
Yeah.
when they're, connecting people. So it's a little bit more, I would say, on that end for a sponsor.
Yeah. Well, it is also, I think, one of the questions that we talked about really was, what is your vision when you run these programs for what great looks like, right? And how these types of programs are run in an organization. I definitely, that was one of the threads that I pulled from our conversation. But what else do you want to share about, what you've learned in delivering so many of these different programs around not only what does good look like, but what is the vision that you're trying to strive for?
I would say, thinking about the programs that I've run, what is great is when, the outcomes are met, of course, but honestly, when people are engaged and they're very intentional about their participation. So
Mm,
we want to see, sponsors who are actively reaching out to the person that they're working with, also actively seeking opportunities for that person to grow or to introduce that person. But you also want to see the sponsee being proactive as well. And I think a lot of times that part gets lost. There's
mm,
also responsibility on the sponsee or the participant to also be reaching out to a sponsor, asking them about opportunities they know about, or if you see something happening in their network, dig into that, ask them about it, get curious.
yeah.
Try to also kind of make your own path through this program. So I think that's like what great looks like. Both sides are fully engaged, both sides are working towards the goal. And I think that's when you see the most impact happen in these programs.
And to go one level deeper, because people always love to hear, like, oh, but how did you do that? Is
Yeah.
there any tactic or approach that you took to really ingrain or model these behaviors for these participants that you thought was impactful?
Yeah, maybe we were a bit too prescriptive, but in the beginning of the program, we actually we gave a document that outlined what are the expected behaviors from you. So
Mm,
it had things like be proactive in contacting your counterpart, look for opportunities,
yeah.
research networks, research ways you can expand. And these were on both sides of the program. So we were, yeah, maybe a bit prescriptive, but we gave them these guidelines in the beginning to make sure that they know, at a minimum, these are things you can do. And
Yeah.
then that made them feel definitely more secure, and it helped have more structure to the program. Something else is just finding the right people.
Yeah.
There are actually a lot of people who've already been sponsors before, but they just didn't know it. So
Mm.
once you talk to them about the opportunity and you say, hey, this is what it looks like, they're like, oh, I do that all the time. It's like, well, do you want to do it for this program? And here's a timeline. And then, maybe they do. And that's also awesome.
Yeah, I think that's what's the power of actually just articulating those behaviors, right? It sounds so simple, but sometimes people are not conscious that that is something that they're doing that is having tremendous value and impact for others. And the other is that sometimes we don't realize that someone takes on a role, maybe because they're a sponsor and they're very high up in an organization, they have a lot of power and influence. We assume they know what to do.
Right.
So I feel like, when you talked about really articulating that there's so many ways that that's impactful, because you aren't just assuming that people understand what you're trying to accomplish and the outcomes you're trying to drive.
Yeah, exactly. I totally agree. And again, for all those people out there who are being sponsors without knowing it, maybe, reflect on how you're helping others, and you may be sponsoring them, even if it's unofficial.
Yeah. Yeah. And how is there any like a specific program that you want to talk more about that you feel particularly proud of, that you felt like, hey, this really sort of captured this essence of this vision and the outcomes that I wanted to drive?
Yeah, definitely the African American China Leadership Fellows Program, AACLF. And I want to talk about it partially because it was completely new experience for me.
Mm,
It's in a nonprofit organization, American Mandarin Society, but also it was my first time just being introduced to a group of people that I didn't really know very well and who all just had this common goal and idea. And we were
mm,
able to build it into something that's creating change, which was just amazing to see. But another reason why I want to talk about that is because I think it's a great example of where we saw there was a need. We saw a dearth of representation in African Americans in certain spaces in
yeah.
international affairs. And we thought that maybe sponsorship and leadership development is the answer to help change that? And it
Yeah.
turns out it is. So some of the impact we've seen is we may hear things like people will say, I've actually never seen this many people who look like me in this kind of event. Or I've
Yeah.
never seen this many people who look like me who know this information.
Yeah. Yeah.
That's really impactful. But even more so, we've had people who, partially through the knowledge and the connections they've gained through our program, were able to get their dream job, a job they never imagined they could get just because they didn't know the right people or they weren't in the right spaces. So we were able to, work with their sponsor. They worked with their sponsor, they networked, they did the research, and they were able to get themselves into that space. So that's just really it gives me so much fulfillment to see that happen. And every
Yeah.
time I hear things like, oh my gosh, I'm so glad I have this community, or I can't believe I found someone else who thinks about this thing too, who also has the shared lived experience with me. That's
Yeah.
just amazing. But then also you have those kind of other bright shining stars where you get a dream job, or someone got a book deal, someone started their own business. And again, it came from an idea and now it's changing people's lives. So I just love that so much.
Well, and I love that the program and initiative help them forward their own development, right? And have impact in many different ways. Like you said, it from a job to maybe a connection or a business opportunity, but it kind of shows just how far and wide just community and being able to bridge communities, relationships, and networks can go.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think we take for granted how many people aren't able to find a community through no fault of their own. It just so happens, in their environment there was not that community feeling, or they just never came across the right people. And when you connect them, you just get this energy that is amazing.
Have you done similar things like that within an organization? So, like a large scale organization like Workday, I'm sure you're running similar types of programs. Have you found differences in how you build community through these programs or learning? Or do you feel like it's actually pretty similar?
I would say there is a difference. So in Workday, we do have mentorship and sponsorship programs as well, but
Yeah.
obviously the scale is completely different. So AACLF has 10 pairs,
Yeah.
whereas one of our Workday programs at one point had 91 pairs, and they were people all over the world, all different levels, different functions. So the way that the community looks, in a small group of 10 pairs who are also
Yeah.
all part of the same identity group is going to be
Yeah.
much different from like a Workday where people are from everywhere and they all kind of have different experiences. But so the approach that you'll take is going to be, nuanced. So
Yeah.
let's say for AACLF, we're all African Americans. We have kind of shared experiences of the types of barriers we face. And those things kind of become core tenets of the program, like core connecting factors. Whereas inside of a large program inside of Workday, it was more about, well, my next step, I want to become a director, or my next step, I want to enter a new field and I want to transition. How do I do that? And those are more of the kind of connectors inside of that kind of program. So we'll focus more of our efforts there. So that's just some of the differences that I've seen.
And how do you try to understand what are those, individual goals or priorities of the folks that are coming into the program?
Big one is ask, but
Right.
sometimes when you ask, people don't know yet. So
Yeah.
you have to
Yes.
ask those leading questions, and you have to give some scaffolding around how you ask to help spark the ideas for people. So
Yeah.
instead of just asking, what do you want? You probably want to ask, where are you right now in your career? What is an ideal role or an ideal type of job you might do next?
Yeah.
Or what topics in your professional career interest you the most that you want to learn more about? These are the kinds of questions you can ask to get to what is the need, or like, what do they want to do in the case that they might not know. And also sometimes people come in knowing for sure what they want, and that's not what they want.
That's right. That's
So
right.
that's also happened as well. Like in AACLF, we had someone come in very sure that she was going to get a PhD, become an academic. After working with her sponsor, who has a PhD, is in academia, she realized that was not for her. And she was actually someone who was like, no way. She started her own business instead. And
Wow.
and she's succeeding, which is cool to see that. So sometimes there's also, path changes after people have had these reflections and worked with someone who's in what they think is their future.
I mean, I really do believe that's the power of these relationships. Whether at Sounding Board, we obviously, we do a lot of coaching. And, I was nodding my head because we have people come into coaching. They think that they have one goal. They usually end up somewhere else, or there's
Yeah.
other goals or needs or desires that emerge as a result of that engagement and as the relationship builds over time. Um, and those things can be so powerful because it could lead you down a different path, but it could end up being a much more fulfilling path, one that may be more aligned to your own values and beliefs, and, help sort of uncover new thinking and opportunities for you that you may not have thought of.
Totally agree. That was even me. I thought I was going to be a civil engineer. I talked to some civil engineers, even applied for it and did get accepted some places, but with more research found that was not for me. So yeah, but I think also you have to give support around, that fear of change. Some people are very scared of changing from what they thought was going to be it for them. And so
Yeah.
that also is another part of having these programs, or even I guess coaching, is working with people and giving them the support to feel comfortable to make that change and actually follow that new path.
Yeah. Well, if we can switch gears a little bit, I'd love to know, because you had said one of the things you had said was that, it's important to define the outcomes before the programs. I'd love to have you talk a little bit more, whether it's about the programs we've already discussed or any others, around how do you think about measuring the impact of some of these programs that you're running, and whether that's on a smaller scale or a larger scale. That's a topic that's very top of mind for a lot of folks in the industry, as I'm sure you know.
Yeah, and it's also very difficult to have like a solidified answer,
Yeah.
but I would say having the goals in the beginning will help you measure at the end. So you definitely need to know in the beginning what is the need, what is the want, because that's how you're going to measure at the end. So for example, for AACLF, we knew some of the issues were lack of representation,
Yep.
lack of community, lack of networks or the right connections. And then some people also just didn't know for sure what they want to do. What we're going to measure is, has there been increased representation? Do they have this? Has their network expanded? Is there a community growing? And do they know what they want next? Seems very simple, but again, depending on the group's needs, it might be those kinds of things. So those are the things that we measured at the end of the program. We went back and asked, we had one-to-one and we have debriefs and asked, where were you before and how do you feel like that's changed until where you are now? And that's where you get all these stories about the impact that it's making. So it's not going to be quantifiable. It's not going to be, made 50% of my goal. It's going to be something more like, well, now I've met people in this totally different industry or totally different group that I didn't know before.
Yeah.
Or it might be, now I thought I wanted a PhD. Now I know I'm going to start my own business. That's also impact. So it's more qualitative impact. And I think, your team has to be okay with it being qualitative rather than quantitative until you get to scale. Like, let's say then you start to have hundreds of participants. That's when you can start measuring 50%, 60% said this thing about their experience. And that's when you start to get the numbers.
Yeah. I mean, I think that's a important point because, we live in a data-driven, metrics-driven environment, right? Everybody wants to be able to show numbers or percentage increases against different programs that they're running. And I thought your statement was pretty profound. Like, you have to be okay with it being qualitative feedback. Any advice you would give to other folks that are like, oh, but I get pressured to show something around ROI around this to, whoever it is internal to my organization that I have to influence as stakeholders?
Yeah, I would say it's difficult with programs that are quite small. So if it is a small program, you could say X% of people said this was a beneficial experience, or X% of people said their network increased, if that's one of your outcomes. But I think it always is talking about going back to what was the need and reinforcing, when we started this program, we all agreed this was the need. These were the expected outcomes. And this person said this, that they did get this outcome. So how many people, I guess if you want to quantify again, how many people do you think need to say that for you to feel like it's successful? And some programs, the threshold is just one person. Some programs are going to want more, but that's how you define where your measurements and your success factors are.
Yeah, I think it is such a simple idea, which is what was the problem or what was the challenge that you were trying to solve for the beginning? And then let's make sure you revisit that when you think about whether or not the program or initiative actually addressed that, right? And how did it address that? So sometimes it can be easy to get caught up in thinking, oh, well, it's got to be this or that. And it's like, no, well, why don't you just look back at why you started this in the first place? So I think it's a great reminder for me and hopefully for others out there.
Absolutely.
So if you believe it, we only have a few minutes left. So this conversation always goes faster than I'd like because I have 10 more questions I want to ask you. But the thing we usually always part with is, as you know, we're living in a constantly changing environment, workforce, macro market conditions today. And it's been a pretty disruptive time for a lot of folks that are working in learning and leadership development. And so we always love to give you an opportunity to share, like, what have you kind of learned as you've navigated the last few years or the last year that has helped you be more successful in your role that you would want to impart on others?
Step one is stay the course. For me, I feel that as long as the need is there, and if you haven't seen the needed changes, then we should probably still be working on this issue or on whichever issue it is. But another important thing is finding the right allies. We can't do everything alone, and we can't do everything in a vacuum. And many times when you feel like it's getting a bit scary or you feel like there's a lot of pushback, you may need to rotate and find different allies or find other people who can support you, even if it's outside of your organization or if it's outside of your field or outside of your normal network. I think that's been really beneficial to me personally, but also to the programs that I work on.
Is there a specific story you want to share on that? Like, was there a time you did that really helped you? And then maybe what did that end up impacting in terms of the program you were running?
Sure. Talking about AACLF, US-China relations are at a very difficult stage right now. So you could imagine that when we want to meet with people or we go to people and ask for support, we're going to get these responses that are like, no way, that I'm not touching anything related to China. No way, without even being able to tell the story of why we're doing what we do. So in those instances, we have had to reach out to places we hadn't thought of before. So maybe it's a different type of organization, or maybe it's an organization that doesn't even really do international affairs, but they have some sort of interest in increasing representation of African Americans in professional fields. So it was really trying to find these different kinds of connections that we could pull on that didn't have to be in the straight line of nonprofit or international affairs or government. And that did help us.
Well, I think the thing I'm taking away, Christina, thank you so much for the conversation today, but I'm walking away thinking about how do I continue to grow my community? How do I continue to leverage and get creative about how I build relationships to help me achieve my goals and help others achieve their goals? And I think a great call to action for folks out there would be think about where and who in your network or community you can sponsor and how you can help bring them along into your networks or spaces where they may not have access. So any last words you want to share there?
I'm going to co-sign what you said because that's exactly what I was thinking as well. Definitely sponsor whoever you can, or if you are being sponsored, maybe lead more into that and talk more to that person to try to build that relationship even stronger.
Yeah, love it. Well, thank you everyone for joining us. Thank you again, Christina, for such a great conversation, and hope you have a great rest of the day and your week.
You too. Thank you.
Bye.
Bye.